Hello everybody, we're going to hit you up with another presidential election. This one, the election of 1880, has two new candidates vie for the presidency. Who's going to get the win? Let's find that out right now. Now, as always, we're going to start off with the incumbent party. Excuse me. And that is the Republican Party. The incumbent president, Rutherford B. Hayes, elected in 1877 by that Electoral Commission, and he keeps his promise not to seek a second term, so the Republican nomination wide open come 1880. Three main candidates come up in the proceedings come the Republican National Convention. That is Ulysses S. Grant of Illinois. He is attempting to seek an unprecedented third term as president, and he was backed by a faction of the Republican Party led by New York Senator Roscoe Conkling, called the Stalwarts. The Stalwarts were for political patronage. They were against civil service reform that was proposed by Hayes. Also, he's facing opposition from Maine Senator James G. Blaine, who was the leader excuse me, of the other faction of Republicans called the Half-Breeds. The Half-Breeds sought civil service reform. They're the reform-minded wing of the party. And also coming up in the proceedings, the Secretary of the Treasury, John Sherman of Ohio, and he was backed by a smaller delegation that supported neither of the major factions. So going through 35 ballots, they really don't get anywhere. So on the 36th ballot, a dark horse candidate, Congressman James A. Garfield, a Civil War veteran. Is brought up at the convention, and he receives the nomination as a dark horse compromise candidate. On the 36th ballot, he is not a half-breed or a stalwart. He is going to bring along for the ride Chester A. Arthur, a stalwart from New York, as his running mates. Now that we have a Republican ticket of Garfield and Arthur, let's go to the Democrats. Now, the Democrats hold their national convention, and they put up their own list of candidates. We have Winfield Scott Hancock of Pennsylvania as Civil War general, Delaware Senator Thomas F. Bayard, and Speaker of the House Samuel J. Randall of Pennsylvania. But at the end of the day, it is going to be Hancock who receives the Democratic nomination for president, and he is going to bring along for the ride William H. English of Indiana as his running mate. Now that we have our Republican ticket of Grant and Arthur and our Democratic ticket of Hancock and English, let's go to the campaign and see who's going to win this thing. Now, Hancock and the Democrats were expected to carry that solid South, that Democratic stronghold, while much of the North was considered safe territory for Garfield and the Republicans. Remember, the North was a Republican stronghold. Most of the campaign would involve a handful of close states that included New York and a few of the Midwestern states, and national elections in those days were largely decided by those states. So you can say those states are kind of swing states in a sense. Now, practical difference between the major party candidates were few, and Republicans began the campaign with the all too familiar theme of waving the bloody shirt. The Republicans waved the bloody shirt in 1876. They're going to wave it in 1880. The Civil War by this point has been over for about 15 years, so the hatred from the Civil War that came from the war is still there. Republicans reminded Northern voters that the Democrats was responsible for secession and 4 years of Civil War, and that if they held power, they would reverse the gains of that war, dishonor Union veterans, and pay Confederate soldiers pensions, out of the federal treasury. But this appeal to wartime loyalties was of diminishing value in exciting the voters up to this point. Now, the Democrats campaigned on the character of the candidates. They attacked Garfield for his connection with the credit mobilier scandal of the early 1870s, in which many members of Congress were bribed by the Credit Mobilier Corporation, a railroad construction company. That railroad construction company called Union Pacific. Garfield's precise involvement was unknown, but modern biographers agree that his account of his dealings with the construction syndicate were less than perfectly honest. So the Democrats ended up using this incident as a contrast with Hancock, who, as a career Army officer, stood apart from Congress and lobbyists. But remember, Garfield himself had fought in the Civil War and was a Civil War general. Many in the Republican Party were reluctant to directly criticize the hero of Gettysburg, but they did characterize Hancock as uninformed on the issues, and some of his former comrades in arms gave critical speeches regarding his character. Now, Democrats never made clear what about their victory would improve the nation, but it was later but their message was characterized as simply, our man is better than your man. So basically it's a what I can do, what you can do, I can do better type of thing. Now, the Greenback Party. The Greenbacks were a third party formed in this election. I'm not going to mention them as much because they're really not important, but James B. Weaver was nominated for president by the Greenback Party, but keep that name in the back of your mind because he's going to be coming up again. But they saw the impact of Civil War loyalties more acutely as they vied for Southern votes. Weaver embarked on a speaking tour of the South in July and August. Although the local Greenback parties had seen some recent success, the National Party with an ex-Republican Union general at the head of the ticket, so this election full of Union generals, faced more opposition. The party's courtship with the black voters too, threatened the white Democratic establishment, leading to violent outbursts at Weaver's rallies and threats against his supporters. As Weaver campaigned in the North in September and October, Republicans accused him of purposely dividing the vote to help Democrats win a plurality in marginal states. Although Weaver refused to cooperate with Democrats in running fusion slates of presidential electors in state-level races, Greenback candidates did often combine with Democrats to defeat Republican candidates. Now, we're going to move on from the bloody shirt to tariffs. So, after moving away from waving the bloody shirt, the Republicans began to emphasize policy differences a little bit more. One significant difference between them and the Democrats was a purposely vague statement in the Democratic platform endorsing a tariff for revenue only. Garfield's campaigners used this statement to paint the Democrats as unsympathetic to the plight of industrial laborers, a group that benefited from a high protective tariff. The tariff issue cut Democratic support in industrialized northern states, which were essential in establishing a Democratic majority. Hancock made the situation worse than it already was. Attempting to strike a moderate stance, he said the tariff question is a local question. Now, Hancock was completely wrong about this. Tariff preferences often reflected local concerns, but the statement was at odds with the Democratic platform and suggested that Hancock did not understand the issue. Before we move on, I want to talk about the difference between Democrats and Republicans on tariffs. Republicans wanted a high protective tariff because they believed it protected industry, while the Democrats wanted a lower tariff because they believed the high tariffs that the Republicans were proposing were unfair to workers. Now, the change in tactics appeared to be effective as state elections in Ohio and Indiana resulted in Republican victories there. Now, Democratic Party leaders had suggested dropping William H. English, Hancock's running mate, from the ticket, but he convinced them that the October losses owed more to local issues and that the Democratic ticket could still carry Indiana, if not Ohio, in the election. Now, in the last weeks before the election, the issue of Chinese immigration entered the race. Both major parties pledging their platforms to limit immigration from China, which native-born workers in the western states believed was depressing their wages. When most Asians came to the United States, they usually lived out in the western states, lived out on the West Coast, things of that nature. But on October 20th of 1880, however, a Democratic newspaper published a letter purportedly from Garfield to a group of businessmen pledging to keep immigration at the current level so that industry could keep workers' wages low. Garfield denounced the letter as a ruse, but not before 100,000 copies of the newspaper were mailed to California and Oregon. Once the letter was exposed as a forgery, a Garfield biographer with the last name of Heskin believes it may have even gained votes for the Republicans in the East, but it likely weakened him in the West. Was he right about this? Let's get to the results right now. Now, the electoral result is going to be pretty decisive. Garfield's going to win another election for the Republican Party, 214 electoral votes, while Hancock, the Democrats, get 155. Garfield and Hancock split the states, 19 states each between them. The only other time this happened was in 1848, and it hasn't happened since. If you take a look here at the electoral map, here's how the map turned out. Garfield's going to do well out west, although he does lose Nevada and California to Hancock. He's going to do well in the Midwest. He's going to do well in the North. But Hancock going to carry that solid South. He's going to carry those border states and those mid-Atlantic states as well. Now, the popular votes, it's a squeaker. 48.27% of the popular vote goes to Garfield. 48.25% of the popular vote goes to Hancock. Less than 2,000 votes. Only under 2,000 votes separated these guys. This is the smallest popular vote margin ever recorded. And now, before we end this video, although Hancock's sweep of the South was not enough for him to win the election, it cemented Democratic control in the South really until the 1960s. Now, that solid South's going to start to break in the late 1940s, but it's really not going to be until the 1960s when that Democratic hold on the South weakens. But at the end of the day, Garfield is the president, but he's not going to last very long. And we'll talk about that next time in the election of 1884. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't seen any of my previous ones, go on ahead and watch those if you want. And with that, we will see you next time.